The red and blue lights bounced off my camper windows like some twisted disco ball, illuminating the peaceful lake behind my property. 2 officers approached me with that cautious walk they do when they're not sure what they're dealing with. I stood there in my work boots and dusty jeans, holding nothing more dangerous than a clipboard with my construction permits. Behind them, Karen Fitzgerald stood with her arms crossed, tapping her foot like she'd just caught a teenager toilet papering her house. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't move an inch in the evening breeze, probably held in place by a can's worth of hairspray and pure spite. "Sir, we received a call about trespassing on this property," the younger officer said, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. I couldn't help but smile. "Officers, I own this property. Bought it 3 weeks ago. Would you like to see the deed?" Karen's face turned an impressive shade of purple. "That's impossible. My son Kyle had dibs on this lot." And that's when I knew this was going to be one hell of a story. Let me back up a bit. My name's Daniel Patterson, and I'm a 28-year-old high school science teacher who'd been saving for years to buy my own little piece of paradise. When the lakefront lot at 1427 Sunset Ridge Drive went up for sale in the Clearwater Estates HOA community, I jumped on it faster than my students dive for their phones when the bell rings. The bidding process took weeks. I went through inspections, negotiations, and more paperwork than I assign in a semester. But finally, the lot was mine. 7,000 square feet of prime lakefront property with mature oak trees and a view that made my realtor jealous. I'd barely finished signing the papers when I decided to move my camper onto the property. Nothing fancy, just somewhere to sleep while I cleared the land and prepped for construction. The first few days were perfect. I'd wake up to ducks on the water, spend my summer break planning where everything would go, and fall asleep to cricket symphonies. Then Karen showed up. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was measuring out where the foundation would go when a golf cart screeched to a stop at the edge of my property. Out stepped a woman in her early 50s, wearing what I can only describe as aggressive suburban chic, head-to-toe Lululemon, oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy day, and a clipboard that she wielded like a weapon. "Excuse me," she called out in that tone that immediately tells you someone's about to ruin your day. "You can't be here." I straightened up, wiping sawdust off my hands. "Good morning to you too. I'm Daniel Patterson. Just bought this lot." Her face went through several expressions before settling on indignant disbelief. "That's not possible. There must be some mistake." "No mistake. Closed on it last Monday. You must be one of my new neighbors." She drew herself up to her full 5 foot 4 inches. "I'm Karen Fitzgerald, president of the Clearwater Estates HOA board. And I'm telling you, there's been a terrible error. My son Kyle had his heart set on this lot. He told me he was interested in it first." I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was already exhausted. "Well, that's unfortunate for Kyle, but the lot went through a standard bidding process. I made the winning offer." "You don't understand," she said, stepping closer like proximity would make her argument stronger. "Kyle is studying to be an architect. He had plans drawn up for this exact spot. He showed them to me months ago." "That's nice. But showing his mom some drawings doesn't constitute a legal claim to property." Her nostrils flared. "We've lived in this community for 15 years. Kyle grew up here. He deserves first consideration for any lakefront properties." I couldn't help but laugh, which was apparently the wrong response. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not how real estate works. I went through the proper channels, made a fair offer, and bought the property. I'm sorry if Kyle's disappointed, but—" "This isn't over," she interrupted, spinning on her designer sneakers and marching back to her golf cart. "I'll be reviewing your paperwork very carefully. Very carefully indeed." I watched her speed away, leaving tire marks on my fresh gravel, and had the sinking feeling that my peaceful summer project had just gotten complicated. The harassment started the very next day. I woke up to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my camper door. According to the notice, I was in violation of HOA Code 7.3.2 unauthorized structures. The camper, apparently, hadn't been approved by the architectural committee. I'd done my homework, though. Temporary structures during construction were explicitly allowed for up to 6 months. I had it in writing. Then came the emails. Dozens of them, all from K. Fitzgerald at clearwaterhoa.com. They started professionally enough. Dear Mr. Patterson, we've discovered some discrepancies in your purchase documentation. But they quickly devolved into barely veiled threats about protecting the character of our community and ensuring lots go to deserving families. I responded to the first few, attaching my permits and purchase documents, but it was like arguing with a brick wall that had learned to type. Every response just generated 3 more emails with new imaginary problems. A week later, things escalated. I came back from a supply run to find my water had been shut off. A call to the utility company revealed that someone had reported a leak emergency at my address. It took 4 hours and a visit from a confused technician to get it turned back on. Weird, the tech said, scratching his head. The person who called it in was very insistent, but there's nothing wrong with your connection. I had a pretty good idea who that person was. The next morning, I woke up to Kyle himself standing at the edge of my property, taking photos with his phone. He was in his mid-20s, soft around the edges with the look of someone who'd never been told no in his life. "Can I help you?" I called out. He startled like I'd caught him stealing. Just documenting the destruction of natural habitat. Mom says you're planning to clear-cut the whole lot. Your mom says a lot of things. None of them true. I'm taking down 3 dead trees and that's it. He snorted. Whatever. This should have been mine anyway. I saw it first. Seeing isn't buying, Kyle. Mom says possession is 9/10 of the law, he shot back. Your mom should probably Google what that actually means. Also, I possess the deed, so. He stomped off, probably to report back to Mommy that the mean man wouldn't give up his legally purchased property. The false complaints kept coming. Noise violations when I was using power tools at 2 in the afternoon. Parking violations for my truck that was entirely on my property. She even tried to claim my boundary survey was wrong, which led to an awkward afternoon with a surveyor who confirmed that yes, I knew where my own property lines were. But Karen's masterstroke came 3 weeks after our first encounter. I was eating lunch in my camper when the police cars pulled up. And that brings us back to where we started, with me standing there in work clothes while Karen demanded my arrest for trespassing on my own land. "Ma'am," the older officer said, clearly trying to maintain professional patience, "this gentleman has provided a valid deed and all proper documentation. He owns this property." But Kyle had dibs. Karen actually stamped her foot like a toddler. He told everyone at the Memorial Day barbecue that he was going to buy it. The younger officer looked at his partner with an expression that clearly said, "Is she for real?" That's not how property law works," the older officer explained slowly. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. We'll be on our way. This is harassment." Karen shrieked. "He's harassing my family by buying property my son wanted." The older officer turned back to her. "Ma'am, calling 911 for false reports is a crime. You've wasted emergency resources. I strongly advise you to resolve any disputes through proper civil channels." As they drove away, Karen stood there sputtering. "You haven't heard the last of this. I'm calling an emergency HOA meeting. We have protocols for situations like this." "Situations like what?" I called after her. "Situations where you don't get your way?" She spun around, finger pointed at me like she was casting a curse. "Situations where outsiders think they can waltz into our community and take whatever they want. You'll see. The board will void this sale." I watched her storm off and decided it was time to stop playing defense. The next morning, I drove to the offices of Hartley & Associates, a law firm specializing in real estate and HOA disputes. Jennifer Hartley herself took my case after listening to my story and reviewing my documentation. "She called 911?" Jennifer asked, eyebrows climbing toward her hairline. "And you have the paper trail of all these false complaints?" "Every email, every notice, every timestamp," I confirmed, sliding a thick folder across her desk. She smiled the smile of a lawyer who just found a slam-dunk case. "Mr. Patterson, what Karen Fitzgerald has done constitutes harassment, misuse of emergency services, and abuse of HOA authority. We're going to file a formal complaint with the county, seek a restraining order, and demand a full investigation of her actions as HOA president. Can she actually void my property sale? I asked, voicing my biggest fear. Jennifer laughed. Absolutely not. HOA boards don't have that power, no matter what she thinks. But what we can do is make sure she faces consequences for this behavior. While Jennifer worked her legal magic, I decided to do some community outreach of my own. Turns out, I wasn't the first person Karen had terrorized. My next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Frank Morrison, told me about the time she tried to fine him $800 because his grass was half an inch too tall. Measured it herself with a ruler, Frank said, shaking his head. On her hands and knees in my yard at 6 in the morning. Another neighbor, Jessica Torres, shared how Karen had tried to force her to repaint her house because the shade of beige was too aggressive. She said it clashed with her chakras, Jessica told me, still bewildered years later. I didn't even know beige could be aggressive. Armed with neighborhood support and a stack of legal documents, I attended the emergency HOA meeting Karen had called. The community center was packed, standing room only. Apparently, the drama had become the talk of Clearwater Estates. Karen stood at the podium, dressed like she was addressing the United Nations instead of a suburban HOA. "Thank you all for coming to this urgent meeting," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "I've called you here because we have a serious situation threatening the integrity of our community." She launched into a speech that would have been impressive if it weren't completely detached from reality. According to Karen, I was a dangerous outsider who had manipulated the system to steal property from a deserving community member. She actually used air quotes. When she finally finished, the board president, a tired-looking man named Richard Dalton, asked if anyone else wanted to speak. I stood up. I would. The room buzzed as I made my way to the front, folder in hand. My name is Daniel Patterson. I'm a high school science teacher, not a dangerous outsider. I bought the lot at 1427 Sunset Ridge through completely legal means. I have all the documentation here. I started laying out papers on the table. Here's my deed. Here's my proof of payment. Here are my approved permits. Here are the 47 emails from Miss Fitzgerald demanding I give up my legal property. Here are the false violation notices. Here's the police report from when she called 911 on me for trespassing on my own land. The board members leaned forward, examining the evidence. Karen's face had gone from purple to white. But that's not all, I continued. Here are sworn statements from 8 of your neighbors about Miss Fitzgerald's past abuse of her HOA position. And here's a letter from my attorney outlining the legal action we're prepared to take, including criminal charges for misuse of emergency services. The room erupted in murmurs. Richard Dalton banged his gavel. Miss Fitzgerald, he said slowly, is any of this true? They don't understand. Karen screeched. Kyle deserves that lot. He had plans. He had dreams. Did Kyle ever make an offer on the property? Richard asked. He was going to. He just needed to save up a down payment. I told him to wait until after his graduation party because I was going to give him money as a gift and... So he never actually bid on the property? Richard clarified. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He had dibs, she finally whispered. Richard looked at the other board members, who all nodded. I moved to formally apologize to Mr. Patterson for this harassment. All violations against his property are hereby dismissed. Second, called out another board member. Furthermore, Richard continued, I move to open an investigation into Miss Fitzgerald's conduct as HOA president. Second. This time it was practically shouted by half the room. The vote was unanimous. Karen stood there, gripping the podium like it was the only thing keeping her upright. You can't do this, she whispered. Then louder. You can't do this. I've been president for 8 years. I've kept this community safe from people like him. People like what? Jessica Torres called out. People who legally buy property. People who follow the rules. Frank Morrison added. More voices joined in, years of pent-up frustration finally finding an outlet. Richard had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Miss Fitzgerald, pending the investigation, you are suspended from all HOA board activities. Please surrender your keys to the office and your access to the HOA email system. Karen's hands shook as she reached into her purse. The keys clattered onto the table like dropped coins. She looked around the room, maybe hoping for support, but found only tired faces sick of her tyranny. Then she turned to me, and for a second I thought she might actually lunge across the table. "This isn't over," she hissed. "Yes," Richard said firmly. "It is." 2 weeks later, I was pouring my foundation when Jennifer called with an update. The investigation had found numerous instances of Karen misusing her position, including nearly $10,000 in questionable fines she'd levied over the years. "The county prosecutor is considering charges," Jennifer told me. "Misuse of 911 services alone carries up to $5,000 in fines and potential jail time." "What about Kyle?" I asked, curious about the mama's boy who'd started this whole mess. Jennifer chuckled. "According to my sources, he's moved back in with his father in Oregon. Apparently, the embarrassment was too much." The final HOA meeting about Karen's fate was even more packed than the emergency meeting. She sat in the front row with a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The board presented their findings: years of harassment, misuse of funds, and abuse of power. The vote to permanently remove her from the board was unanimous. But the real kicker came when the county prosecutor stood to announce the criminal charges. "Karen Fitzgerald, you are being charged with misuse of emergency services, a misdemeanor punishable by up to $5,000 in fines and 90 days in jail." Karen shot to her feet. 90 days? For trying to protect my community. "You called 911 to report a fake crime," the prosecutor said flatly. "You're lucky we're not pursuing additional harassment charges." Her lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, probably telling her to shut up before she made things worse. She sank back into her chair, the fight finally going out of her. In the end, she got 30 days in jail, suspended to community service, and the full $5,000 fine. As the gavel came down on her sentence, Karen Fitzgerald looked around the room one last time, maybe finally understanding that dibs wasn't a legal concept. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, tears streaming down her face as the reality hit her. The Queen of Clearwater Estates had been dethroned, and all because she thought her son's wishes trumped the law.